intra-Africa trade. And this is an important event. Now, I wasn't here yesterday, but I got the feedback from yesterday, and I hear that it was a very fruitful discussion, that it was, you had Aliko Dangote, you had the Vice President of the Federal Republic of Nigeria, who's always value for money, always a great guy to hear from, very passionate and articulate and intelligent individual, so we're very grateful for his attendance. And then beyond that, you participated in what was very vibrant sessions about ratification and about how to move this train forward, this journey that we're trying to help ourselves create a stronger and robust free trade area, the biggest free trade area in the world, and how we're going to help African nations trade with African nations. Now, today is no different, and I would ask you once again to consider yourself the 9th panelist. I think there's 8 seats over here, and don't be too polite. Please, if you have questions or interventions, this is your floor too. That's what it's all about. So it's not just about listening to the people that are on the white chairs and the people on the black chairs sit back. It's also about you putting your point forward. So we want to make sure that this is a very robust dialogue. Now, before we begin, a few housekeeping matters. Now, for those of you who need transport to take you to your planes, to the airport, to Murtala Mohammed Airport, could you please find the Mama Yanesh? Yeah, Mama Yanesh, where are you? Is she here in the room? If you're here, put your hand up. No, she's not here, but she will come in a second. Mama Yanesh, anyway, when she comes in, I'll show you who she is. She is going to help you confirm your transportation to the airport. So that's quite important. And now, if my clicker works, yep. Okay, so just go back a second. Okay, so this is the agenda for the day. If you can see it, the agenda for the day is we're going to have a panel called Financing the AFCFTA. And I always say that financing, the money, where the money is going to come from, is singularly the most important conversation that you can be having right now. Because we can talk about implementation and we can talk about all the great things that need to be done. But if there's no money, there's no movement. If there's no support, financial support, and if the levers, the legislation, and the mechanisms around finance are not sorted out, we are going nowhere. So therefore, that financing the AFCFTA session is arguably the most important session of the 2 days, in my opinion. Then we'll take a tea break from 10:30 to 11 o'clock. And then there are the breakout sessions. The breakout sessions take place if you go to the right and around the corner. I think if any of you were there, in the rooms, in the 3 rooms that are to the right of us around the corner there, where the tea is usually served. Breakout session 1 is preparing tariff and services offer. That's in the Neptune room. Breakout session 2, national implementation strategies, quite important for Nigeria, Saturn and Uranus room. Breakout session 3, AFCFTA second phase negotiations. What's the next step? That's in Jupiter room. Then at 1 o'clock, they'll round up on the breakout sessions and we will take a lunch break. Lunch is served downstairs on the ground floor for those that weren't here yesterday. If you know this hotel, I don't know, most of you have been here before. As you come into the reception and you turn right, there is an area to the left that is often open and used as just as a lobby area for meetings and so on. That's been cordoned off and is now our section for our lunch break. 2 o'clock to 3 o'clock is making the AFCFTA a reality, and I would really urge you, please, stay with us till the final session and the closing session, because making AFCFTA a reality is effectively what we're talking about here. So it's summing up, crystallizing everything we've said over the last 2 days. So please, I can't crystallize without you. I need you there. So please stay with me from 2 to 3 for making the AFCFTA a reality. And then we'll have the closing ceremony. There'll be lots of hugs. There'll be kisses and tears. Well, maybe not. I'm exaggerating. But anyway, we'll be happy it's the closing ceremony. Okay. And then we'll have some more tea and coffee for those that want to have coffee. Okay. So we're very social media mobile. So there's a lot of social media happening, and I hope you're tweeting away. I hope you're sending this on. I hope many of you have massive followings, and you have massive followings on LinkedIn. You have it on Twitter. You have it on all the different social mediums. We implore you that one of the ways that we will get the message out about the CFTA is through you. You're all evangelists of the CFTA. So if you look at the screen, these are the Twitter handles. I won't go through them, but you can see them there. If you don't grab them anyway, but you could ask Lily. Lily has them. She's memorized them, and she says them in her sleep. She has them in her head. So Lily will tell you if you don't remember any of them. And then also, we're very digitally prepared in this event, because we've also got an event app, which is available on app stores and Android. And then there's a live poll going on, and someone was supposed to send me some results of that. I'm sure I'll get them later in the course of the day. The question is, in your opinion, how important is the AFCFTA agreement in supporting economic development in Africa? Not important, so important, very important. I have no idea what you're talking about. So those are the questions, and maybe before the end of the day I can give you what the poll results are. Okay, so this is the first session, financing the AFCFTA. Now, let me take you back to 1963, and I think it was Kwame Nkrumah. He said that was Africa's first, Ghana's first president. He said, Africa must unite, and he lamented that African countries sold raw materials to countries outside of Africa instead of trading among themselves. That was 1963, he said that. Now you fast forward to today, and you have our nation still trading twice as much with Europe as we do with ourselves. And now what we witnessed last March in Kigali, and I had the singular honor of both being the moderator of the first ever AFCFTA Business Forum, which came out of, by the way, the Africa Trade Week, which we did with the Commissioner Fatima Haram Asil, who's sitting in front of me. I haven't seen you probably since then, so it's great to see you in the front seat there. And then with Ambassador Albert Muchanga, we did a very robust day with 5 presidents talking about the AFCFTA. And then we went on the next day to witness history. And we saw 44 countries signing what was going to be a piece of a document that was going to change the fortunes of Africa. And I was the MC at that day, and it was quite amazing to view. It was really history in the making. What we witnessed was something that could have a potential market of 1.2 billion people in 55 countries. And we're all encouraged by that drive to sort of break free from the situation that we're in, that prevents us from trading with each other. Now, we're going to be talking about financing. Now, there is significant deficits in meeting the demand for trade finance across Africa. And even before the AFCFTA was signed, the conservative estimates for the shortfall of trade finance was roughly about 110 to 120 billion US dollars. It might have gone up since those figures were published. Now, they suggest, those figures, that the market is significantly, and I'm being modest here, underserved. So in addition to intra-African trade fair being hampered by the lack of finance, it's also hampered by a multiplicity of currencies, which is something we really want to get into. And also, as I said, we need innovative financing mechanisms. We need innovative financing mechanisms. So who's going to talk about that? Well, I have a fantastic panel. It is a huge panel as well, quite a few people. So I'm going to ask for those people who know that they're going to be coming up just to start making their way. First, Joy Kategekwa, who is the UN Conference of Trade and Development representative. Give her a round of applause. Never easy to be the first person. Joy, you can sit. Why don't Joy, sit next to me. I'm sitting here, and you can sit there. You can bring me joy. You get it? And then Tunde Kainde, who is the co-founder of Lydia. Tunde, are you here? Tunde, nice to meet you. I think I've been on a panel with you before. Yeah, you can sit on the other side. Thank you. I didn't have to ask. Thank you. Ali Madungo is the president of the Kano Shippers Association. He's also the vice president of the Manufacturers Association of Nigeria. We so badly need you here, sir. Thank you. Please take a seat over there. And then Edem Adzogenu. Edem, are you here, Edem? Is Edem here? Oh, he's in the ratification session. Oh, I have him here. Okay. Oh, that's fine. Hopefully I've got the right people. Senio Adio. Is that right? Yes, Senio Adio. Okay. Managing partner, Copley Partners, and co-chair of the Nigerian Coalition of Services Industry. Senio, you're welcome. Amin Mati is the resident representative for Nigeria for IMF. Sir, you're welcome. And then Tony Ebiziako is from the Nigerian Stock Exchange. He's the head of the Primary Markets Department. Tony, are you here, Tony? Come in, Tony. Is Tony here? No? I really wanted the Nigerian Stock Exchange to be here. No, he's not? Okay. All right. We'll move on. And then my brother, Hippolyte Fofak from Afrexim Bank. Hippolyte Fofak. Hippolyte is the chief economist. And Hippolyte only ever meets me on stage. Is that right? That we only meet on stage. And then Franklin, do we have Franklin Erebo? Is he here yet? Franklin, you're welcome. You're very welcome. Franklin, if you could take this seat here. Now, okay, and I'm going to take my seat. I think I'm allowed to. I don't have anything else to go through. Do I on my clicker? No. Okay, just the breakaway sessions. All right. Okay, let's get the show on the road. Okay, so we're going to use these microphones here. So if I give you, gentlemen, you two over there, this one, and then you, gentlemen, you've got one there. Then maybe over, you've got one here. You haven't got one? Okay, there you go. Has everybody got one? No, you've got one there. Okay, and then of course translation is on is French and English. I believe English is 1 and French is 2. Okay, all right. Okay, so how we're going to do this is I'm going to go through my list, or maybe I just kind of work my way down. Well, let's mix it up. We'll just go down through the list. And I'll give you 2 minutes to talk from your perspective about how intra-African trade possibly could be financed, what needs prioritizing, why it's important, and from your perspective, where the bottlenecks are. And I'm going to give you 2 minutes for a stream of consciousness. And I'm going to begin with Joy from the UN Conference of Trade and Development. Madame, take the floor, 2 minutes.
Right, thank you very much for the invitation. Good morning to you all. I'm very pleased to be here representing Dr. Mukisa Kitui, who was supposed to be on this panel. How do we finance intra-African trade? I think that there's a critical role for foreign direct investment, because yesterday we saw the breadth of the challenge that, in fact, for the CFTA to work, we needed to engage in productive sectors to allow for structural transformation of Africa. And therefore, you need the sorts of resources that will finance agro-processing, manufacturing, and services. We also know that there's a huge investment gap, 11.4 trillion, UNCTAD views it as that, 100 billion annually, if you want to think about it that way. And therefore, I think there's a critical role for foreign direct investment to play in terms of targeted policies that bring investment, particularly into these productive sectors of agro-processing, of manufacturing, of industry. Obviously, we can think about the sources coming from outside of Africa. That is an interesting prospect. The challenge there, of course, is that most of it is in the extractive sector. And so we have to think about how to have a positive perspective towards intra-African investment. And there you find interesting numbers from South Africa, 7.4 billion last year, from Morocco, from Togo in terms of financial services and so on and so forth. And so the point I'd like to stress here is that there is a role for foreign direct investment, and there is an interesting perspective as to how intra-African investment could play a role there. And therefore, the need to think about the CFTA investment phase 2 as something to carefully consider, because it's not true that there's no potential for intra-African investment. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for setting us off at a run there, Joy. I'll move on to Tunde. Tunde, you're the co-founder of Lydia. First, tell people what Lydia is.
Morning, everyone. Thanks for having me. So, to set some context, so Lydia, we help small businesses access credit within 1 day. So the idea is you apply today, you have money in your account by tomorrow, and we do this using data and technology with zero collateral. And it's a very interesting question you raised. Look, how do you actually go about getting credit into the hands of businesses so that they can transact? And so to even step you back a bit further, so my background, I started and used to run Jumia here in Nigeria, which is the largest e-commerce platform now across Africa. And my co-founder and I left after a couple of years and set up a logistics business that helps small businesses deliver goods across Africa and now into Europe and into the States. And we kept seeing the same challenge, that all these customers would struggle to scale because they never had consistent access to credit to grow. And when you look at, I think even beyond Nigeria, beyond Africa, how do traditional lenders, it's tough to bank small businesses because typically what you need to qualify for a loan from a commercial bank is collateral, audited financials, a 5-year projection. And for most entrepreneurs, they might be great practitioners, but they won't have these traditional items that need to be evaluated for a loan. So what we said is, look, let's simplify the process. What are the bits of data we can collect that allow us to assess a small business customer? It can be your receivables, it can be purchase orders, it can be your bank account statements, and then use that now to get comfort around the risk tied to this small business owner, and now give them a facility, but not just give them the money, also give an incentive, because the big challenge we've seen is not only is there no credit, there's no consequence of credit. So whether I'm a good credit or a bad credit, I get the same rates, I get the same terms as anyone else.
And when my mic, can you keep it on? You are challenging me over there. Can you keep this on? Thank you. And we're talking about, when we talk about credit, all credit is not created equal. We're talking about export financing as well, which is kind of like you're a small business and you're going and saying, I want money for export, which is another issue too, isn't it? But then they're looking at them sideways. So how are you helping with that?
No, it's interesting. So overall, we've done close to 3 billion naira worth of small business loans in the last year and a half.
Tell people what that is in dollars, for those people that do know the conversion.
Sure. So over $8 million, $9 million worth of financing in the last year and a half to small businesses. And this year we've done about 2.5 million in trade financing, so export financing. Mm-hmm. And what we've seen is there are a number of exporters who look, I might not be huge, but I have demand for 5 containers of sesame or cocoa or timber going around the world. And I've worked with a particular buyer for a number of years. The challenge I have is they want to go from 5 containers to 7 containers to 10 containers, but I don't have the cash to do that. So how can you assess me? And that's where we come in. So what we say is, look, it's similar to how you look at factoring or invoice discounting. Look, if you have a credible buyer you've worked with for a number of years, you have a track record which we can verify through your buyer, through your bank account, through your bank statements, we are able to assess you and give you a percentage against your expected receivable, that purchase order, and then we'll now give you an incentive to say, look, if you're able to fulfill on time, settle your debts, over time we can now begin to give you risk-adjusted pricing. So there's a strong incentive here to say, look, if I am a good actor in the system, not only will I get the loan, I need to do my business, but over time I'll get higher amounts, better rates, and a credit score that, look, you can use within Lydia, but potentially even outside of Lydia.
Fascinating, fascinating. We're talking about innovative financing strategies. There, you've got one right there. Okay, moving on now, a bit closer to home for me as a Nigerian. It's a pleasure to give the floor to Ali Madungu. Now, Ali is the president of the Kano Shippers Association, and I will say this about Kano. If you ever get an opportunity to go to Kano, it is the beating heart of the north. There is so much going on there. I was there just recently, and I would encourage you to get an invite from Ali to come up to Kano, yes?
Oh, yes.
And then you also wear two hats. You're also the vice president of Manufacturers Association of Nigeria, who we heard from yesterday. Now, I want you in your first intervention to kind of address the initial, because you know when you hear things third hand, you know, it's Chinese whispers. You're not hearing the purity of the message. And from Nigeria, we heard the Manufacturing Association's voice as a very resistant voice to the CFTA when we were there in Kigali. And I was in Kigali at the time hearing this feedback from my own country. So perhaps you could address that from your perspective, and also from the perspective of being someone who's the head of a shippers association. I'll give you 2 minutes, sir.
Okay, thank you very much. Let me start with the first intervention you want me to make. Really, Manufacturers Shop Nigeria, like it was said yesterday, we have over 2,500 members in Nigeria, and we are not saying no to AFCFTA. We are saying yes, but with cautions. As of today in Nigeria, many manufacturers are battling with smuggled, substandard, and dumping of goods unnecessarily from another markets, which, if we look at the inter-African trade, right now, what are we doing? And what do we want to do? Most of the production here, if you look at the cost of production, it is a little bit high. Competitiveness.
And that's because of power, right, mostly?
Because of everything. Power, cost of financing, to some extent, infrastructure. Apart from even power, the roads. It is cheaper for you to bring in a container from Asia than bringing a container from Lagos to Kano. So a lot of these issues are there on the ground, whereas if you look at, let's say, other countries like Niger, Chad, and other African countries, they are still depending on Nigerian market. But what are they buying from Nigerian market? They are still buying these dumped smuggled goods, apart from Nigerian goods that they are buying, because the dumped goods are a little bit cheaper. So in essence, what we are saying is, let us do the right thing. Let us know where we are going to. Let us know the implications. In MAN, we have 8 sectoral groups. We have more than close to 60 subsectoral groups. Out of these sectors, we are not saying no. Many will progress, money will develop, money will gain more from this. But many are going to lose. Who are those that are going to lose, and what could be done to salvage them?
Since March, though, there has been a lot of discussion between the government, between the government's trade office, and the Nigerian Manufacturers Association, and also major CEOs. That discussion has been quite robust since March. Since that time, has your position softened? Have you learned more? Has that been constructive discussion from your vantage point?
There is. In fact, let me tell you that we at our level, we sponsored a study on the implications and what we should do next. And we are already sharing with the government. And at this level, just last week, the president of Nigeria, Muhammadu Buhari, put in a committee that will finalize all those things. So we are very close and very near to signing the agreement. It's not the signing the agreement that is the problem, but the agreement should work. We should make it work.
It should be realistic.
Indeed. And the second question you asked on the issue of shipping, still, it's the same issue. If you look at the Kano, for example, that you have already said, Kano is the center of trans-Saharan trade. 200-300 years ago, Kano had a link with the East, with the East Africa, with the
It's always
North
been
Africa.
intra-Africa trade.
Indeed. The roots are there from Kano to all the other coast of Africa. But today what we are saying is the road network in Africa. Let's take West Africa in particular. The linkage is not there. Let's talk of air transport. Nothing is there. To move goods from coast of Nigeria to, let me give an instance. I used to import tea from Kenya. It takes minimum of 6 weeks for the container to get to Lagos. So with all these challenges, if we now said, okay, yes, we have signed. After all, if I buy tea from India, it takes maximum 3 weeks. Then if we sign and we are into the agreement today, who will really benefit from it? The Indians will benefit because the cost of production, the cost of transportation, and the means of transportation is easier from east to Nigeria than from Kenya to Nigeria. So definitely, we don't have in Nigeria, from the shipping industry to the manufacturing industry, we don't have anything against signing the agreement, but let us sign what can work. It has been said here yesterday by my senior Alaji Aliko Dangote here that the ECOWAS, the free trade in ECOWAS, the pre-movement, everything, is not really working.
Okay. Okay, Ali, thank you. Thank you for that very spirited intervention. It's good to. This is what we're here for, to hear these things. Let me move on to Seni Adio, SAN. The SAN means Senior Advocate of Nigeria. These are our top lawyers. Our vice president is a senior advocate. Our former governor is a senior advocate. It's like Privy Silk, or Silk as they call it in the UK. So Seni, you're the chairman. I think you're the new chairman, right?
Right
chairman.
here.
You're the new chairman. You took over from Oluwapata.
Correct, yes.
In maybe August or so. Now, this SPL. Let me explain the section on business law of the Nigerian Bar Association is a really robust and important part of the Nigerian Bar Association. I've had the privilege of actually moderating not this year, but last year's session. You had 1,500 people in the audience. I've never moderated to such a big audience. There are so many young lawyers in the commercial arm of law, and you're a very significant voice in business as well. Now, often in these things, I say, where are the lawyers? Where are the lawyers? Because the regulation and the legal aspects of it are so vital. Plus, not just that, the business. If I was a young lawyer, yeah, I'm thinking, how can I work across Africa? Or beyond that, how can I work across? How can I not be quarantined within my own country? I would very much get onto the bandwagon of understanding intra-Africa trade and engaging myself, because there's work for the legal profession to do. From your perspective, through your legal lens, so to speak, you're watching all this, and lawyers are good listeners, yeah? What are you making of it? We're trying to ratify this thing. We're trying to bring it into existence. Mr. Lawyer.
Thank you very much, distinguished ladies and gentlemen. Since we're trying to be innovative in raising funds for this very noble project, I think you'd be hard-pressed to find people who are more invested in this regime than those who are in this room. So, Mark, I would suggest that perhaps we could start with a fundraiser from people here to provide seed money.
Excellent idea. Spoken like a true lawyer.
Well, regarding, I'm wearing two hats this morning. One as co-chair of the Nigerian Coalition for Services Industry. My co-chairperson, Irene Robinson Ayawale, is here. She's the general counsel at the Stock Exchange. I think she's in the room somewhere. I'm also the chairman of the Nigerian Bar Association section on business law. And thanks to His Excellency Ambassador Chiyodo Osakwe, he basically brought us on board, and what the SBL has really tried to do is be at the forefront of law reform and enhancing legal practice in Nigeria. So indeed, this avenue provides, even for us, is almost sort of self-interest, enlightened self-interest. Certainly it's going to provide a lot of work for trade lawyers. But over and beyond that, in terms of what we're supposed to be talking about today, this morning, certain areas that lawyers will be involved in would include, syndication of loans, loan agreements, because again, is going to open a vista for a lot of commercial banks. The stock exchange also will be interested in terms of trying to get our businesses to develop capacity and muscle, maybe raising money through the capital markets. And raising money through capital markets is very significant because it would encourage the populace to be invested in this project because you can issue bonds, and that way members of the public can receive periodic income, fixed income from such instruments. I was talking to one of the delegates yesterday in Joki. I hope she doesn't mind by mentioning this, but one of the things she said in terms of trying to expand and grow her business, she's from Kenya, is that she's had difficulty trying to get additional finance from, even though her business is doing very well, from Kenyan financial institutions. And I said to her that perhaps we may want to also speak to other banks in Kenya that are not necessarily, Kenyan originated banks, and maybe they can help with syndicating financing, because that way they're not exposed 100% to your business, but the other banks that come into play in terms of trying to do that. And very quickly, I'll just also add two more things. One is access to finance through perhaps reasoned and strategic and objective way of easing restrictions on pension funds to release monies for large capital projects.
Yeah, and there's a lot of money sitting in pension funds. How big is the Nigerian pension fund now?
I don't have the exact answer, but
54 billion.
It's huge.
It's huge.
It's huge.
Yeah,
it's huge.
And it's money looking for a home.
Absolutely. Similarly, illicit funds that are being transferred out of the continent in the last 10 years, easily over $50 billion worth of illicit funds have been sort of expatriated out of the country, out of the continent. So if we're able to curtail that illicit activity and the monies actually stay on the continent, those kinds of monies, we're talking about in the realm of $60 billion, can go towards capital projects such as power, roads, motorways, railways, and so on and so forth. So I think there are different ways that we can be innovative in trying to find funding to sort of support the implementation of the regime. And those are just 3 or 4 that I want to talk about for now, but I'll be happy to take questions when we get to that stage. Thank you very much.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Seni Adio, Chairman of the Nigerian Bar Association Section on Business Law. I think probably what's going to happen is by the time we get interventions from everybody, I probably will have to open it to the floor. So, and because there's a number of people I actually want to ask questions of on the floor as well, and then we'll sort of come back again. So I'll move now on to Amin Mati from the IMF. I mean, I understand you have about just 4 slides that you want to show us. That's why you're positioned there. You can look at that screen there, and your slides will come up, hopefully. Yes?
I'll do that. Thank you for having me. And given that you are giving 2 minutes, I'll try to go to 2 slides, so I have 2 minutes.
No, you can go to 4 minutes if you've got 4 slides. 1 minute per slide, but not 1 second over.
That's okay. The first slide, I can make it 1 second. And then, so what are we talking about? We're talking about non-oil revenue mobilization, or revenue mobilization as part of the... Okay, thank you for the TA. As part of the financing for the tariff loss that may come in from the moving to the AFCFTA. What are the numbers for the tariff loss? We don't have the latest estimates. I saw yesterday from UNICA that if you were just to remove tariffs on goods, the loss could be about $2 billion, $3 billion. Welfare gains would be much larger at about $10 billion. So then how do you compensate that? Well, you have to do it through increased revenue. Is there space for that?
Well, you're talking about internal revenue like VAT?
VAT, personal income tax, excise. And just the last slide is one point I wanted to flag, is that revenues in the region, in Africa, are much lower than other regions. There is space. It's 18.2% of GDP for sub-Saharan Africa. That's about 5% of GDP lower than most of the country averages. So let's say there's space for another 3 to 5% of GDP. that's $50 to $80 billion in extra revenue that can be collected in the region. So compared to the tariff loss number that I put earlier, the potential is much larger. Now, let's look at it country by country. What we've done here is the dotted line in black, what you've seen there is 13% of GDP, which is what we look at as a revenue, the tipping point, by which, growth is accelerating, where you can really deliver services that are really needed. You find that the first group to your left there in blue is below that tipping point. And then what we did is calculated, given a country's economic characteristic, what is the tax potential? In other words, what's the highest tax given inequality, governance, etc.? And you find here that there is, again, room for each type of group. You have 3 to 5% of GDP that keeps coming back in terms of the tax gap. Those are the shaded areas for those that do not collect. And then you have those that are doing well. They're already collecting more than 13%. But even for those countries, given their economic conditions, you do have a tax potential, and how much more in terms of trying to compensate for any tariff loss. Now, how to do that? There's different ways of doing that, but let me first say, a lot of you, when you hear 3 to 5% of GDP, wow, those numbers look large. Well, there are a lot of success stories. Georgia did it. They went from 12 to 24% of GDP in about 3 years. We don't need to go very far. I've just quoted, you've seen a lot of those countries there on the right-hand side. Some of them that did well, you have Liberia. Liberia did 2.6% of GDP in additional revenue a year. How did they do that? Well, first you need to have the right institutional base. So they started with, taxpayer segmentation, have the right registry. Then you move to let's look at exemptions. A lot of them, for it to work, went for indirect taxation. So, one of your questions earlier is how you get a lot of the revenue. And this could just be improving efficiency, not just increasing the tax rate. So excise is a good source. So I'll just finish with that one. Is excise in sub-Saharan Africa, the average is 1.4% of GDP. In Nigeria, it's 0.1% of GDP. In emerging market, it's 3% of GDP and higher. So the potential for revenue is really there. And for it, when we've looked at some of the success stories, one thing to remember is that you also had stability. Stability in policies, stability in personnel, which helped drive these reforms onward to increase revenue. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you very much. Mati from the IMF now. Let me see. Who else am I missing? Let me see. We don't have Tony Ibieziako from the NSC, so I'll move on to Hippolyte Fofak, Chief Economist from Afrexim Bank. I have 24 questions for you here, and I don't have 24 minutes even. So, could you take a few minutes to talk about how intra-Africa trade and facilitation is going to be financed, what needs to be prioritized, and perhaps also talk about some of the things you're doing. One of which, actually, is the first ever intra-Africa trade fair in Cairo from the 11th to the 17th of December. How do I know that? Because I'm moderating there. So it's self-promotion, But nonetheless, I think it's really exciting because you have so many people. It's going to be huge, isn't it? Massive. So the question is, within your intervention, I want you to talk about why you would belabor yourself to do such a massive event, and also more generally, Afrexim Bank. When we talk about beyond traditional financing and finding the putting all this stuff together, President Benedict Orama and his team, including you being his right hand, have done more than most. In fact, more than anyone really in the area of trade finance. So I'll give you 2 minutes and 38 seconds.
Thank you very much, Mark. I think we've been great friends of Afrexim Bank, but also a great champions of Africa and the Inter-African Trade Fair. And I thought before I get back to my point, it's important to really turn our attention and thank these two commissioners who have created the condition for us to be here today talking about the future of our continent. And the African Union has actually given a meaning and purpose to young Africans who aspire for a better future. And I'm also very inspired by the sense of continuity in leadership. The person who started and the person who closed the deal are sitting next to each other. We need to see more of that in this
That's a beautiful thing. Round of applause, please.
And quite frankly, we talked about President Rama. And at AFCFTA, we strongly believe in the African Continental Free Trade Area. And that's precisely why, even though it was not budgeted, he creatively found a means to support the launch, working closely with Excellency Ambassador Muchanga of the AFCFTA last March in Kigali with your support, Mark. I think we are very grateful, and we'll continue to work with you to make sure that we take this to fruition. We believe that the CFTA is the most important thing happening in Africa in decades. That's why we strongly supported it. It has tremendous potential, not just in terms of growth, but also in terms of industrializations. The session we had yesterday on CFTA transforming Africa was real. And we have estimates showing that intra-African trade could double on the full implementation of the CFTA. Implication for infrastructure investment, implication for industrialization are significant. But the CFTA is not just theoretical and hypothetical. It is already real. You all heard about a leading German manufacturing company committing to build a plant in Rwanda to kickstart the automotive industry. In essence, Rwanda is no longer a small, tiny, landlocked economy. It's become a gateway to the much larger East African market, a gateway to the much larger continental market under the CFTA. So it is real. But we believe that the fact that a German company is among the first to draw on economies of scale offered by the CFTA to take advantage and expand revenue and output, it's a very good thing. It's encouraging. It shows that the potential are real. It also highlights the challenge that we may face in actually financing the CFTA. In particular, if you look at the challenge space, if you take infrastructure, the financing gap infrastructure discussed yesterday, and even now by the Emir of Kano, the leader from Kano, it's about $93 billion a year over the next 10 years to close infrastructure financing gap. And we at AFCFTA believe that those figures have been underestimated because the McKinsey Global Institute put the same estimate for Asia at $1.7 trillion a year. We believe that Asia has more infrastructure endowed than Africa. The second estimate in terms of financing need is what Mark mentioned earlier, the trade finance gap, more than $120 billion annually. Another challenge that we see on the horizon, which was discussed yesterday, is the supply side constraint. The CFTA will work only if we are able to supply the goods needed for the growing intra-African market. That will require building production infrastructure, building industrial park and special economic zone to be able to source and produce this good.
Hippolyte, may I interrupt you? I can't help but ask, how do we do that? Because, you know, the continental supply chain, as we call it, and the export manufacturing capacity needs to be financed, yes? Regulation and policy has a big thing to do with it, doesn't it, right?
Definitely, definitely. I think, how do we actually achieve that? We've heard a number of options presented by colleagues in terms of domestic resource mobilizations. But we at AFCFTA believe that in terms of FDI, we believe that the scale of these financing and resources are such that we have to optimize allocation of resources, both domestically, but also leverage international financing. A couple of options, innovative options that the bank has considered. If we take our syndication window, the bank actually expanded on the Presinorama, our syndication window, to the point where for each dollar injected, whether in to support African trade or to support trade-enabling infrastructure, we are able to generate $7 from abroad. In other words, for each $1 billion we inject, we can source $7 billion outside the continent. That's the first thing. We've also established what we call the Global Facility Line, which is enabling us to provide direct financing to African industrialists engaged in cross-border investments and trade.
How much have you disbursed so far?
I think we've disbursed already $5 billion in that range. We've supported industrialists in North Africa, in Tunisia, in Nigeria, Dangote, El Swedi, in Egypt, and so forth. We've also, under the same line, launched what we call the Project Preparation Facility. In other words, we talked about supply-side constraints, but it's quite clear to us that one of the key constraints is the fact that we have very few bankable projects which come to surface. And for instance, we saw that the gap in terms of project preparations in the continent, we need $6 billion a year. Now we have about 1.2 billion. So the gap is huge.
And is finding those bankable projects a challenge?
Exactly.
It is
a real challenge. So we have launched what we call our Project Preparation Facility to help young African entrepreneurs prepare and source good bankable project, ready to finance project. The banks, Dr. Orama will be launching that in South Africa next week.
You also have a platform of some sort, don't you?
I'll get to that. I think another important aspect of addressing the supply side constraint lies in us, what we call the African Fund for Export Development, FUNFED. We have very creative ideas from young entrepreneurs which do not materialize because of lack of financing. So we have that fund, about $100 million. We're going to encourage other stakeholders to contribute to the pool so that every single young entrepreneur, African entrepreneur, with a good idea will not see the idea die because of lack of financing. So we're going to create the next generations of Africans entrepreneurs.
Tunde, are you listening? Money.
And in particular, we would like to have the next generation of Bill Gates emerging as a result of that initiative. Another important idea that Mark alluded to, it's really what we call the intra-African trade payment platform. It is fundamental. Been working on this closely with Ambassador Muchanga. And the world has moved to the digital world, digital space. In China today, less than 10% actually use cash. The platform will enable us to provide clearing and settlement for intra-African trade payments. It is significant. Been working closely with the West African Monetary Union in the pilot. Now we are on the technology space to deliver this at some point next year. And this will actually achieve a lot in terms of reducing the foreign currency contents of intra-African trade, which has been a key constraint, especially when we go through the commodity super cycle, when it comes to an end. Accessing the hard dollar will become a major issue. The intra-African trade payment platform will enable us to transcend those challenges. But it will do more than that. When you look at the figure for intra-African trade, we said 15%. But if you go granular in that space, South Africa alone accounts for 25% of total intra-African trade. Let's go for a wild guess. Which country is number 2? Nigeria, who's number 2? Intra-African trade. Egypt, no. 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 Nigeria, no. So Kenya, definitely not, you see. So the first country is South Africa, 25%, about $32 billion. The second country is Namibia, 5.9%, about 7.6 billion. And Nigeria is number 3, 5.5%, about $7.1 billion. But if you take out Nigeria all export to South Africa, Nigeria is back to 1.9%. In other words, What South Africa has done by addressing the supply side constraint in terms of industrial development has enabled it to take advantage of intra-African trade opportunities. So we know what ought to be done. We know what Nigeria could do to become the South Africa of tomorrow. So that's another important aspect. And the intra-African trade platform will provide the financing for it. But it will also, and to close, one of the key reasons why intra-African trade from Nigeria perspective may be this low could be due to the cross-border informal trade between Nigeria and Benin and so forth. So inter-African trade payment platform will enable us to gradually formalize the informal trade and have a better estimate of intra-African trade. So those are some of the specific issues that the bank is undertaking. And of course, the trade fair that we are launching next month will be one of the best way to actually use as a barometer to assess how the continent is doing in increasing intra-African trade, to monitor that on biannual basis. It will be a barometer to assess the diversification of sources of growth and the transition of African economies. Great. I think hopefully we'll have the chance to talk more about the trade fair at some point later today. Thank
you. Definitely. Thank you very much. And now, to round up this part of the discussion, I'm going to go last but not least to another fellow countryman, Franklin Erebo, who is head of global finance at UBA, and also, I guess, to some degree representing one of our superheroes of business, Mr. Tony Lumelu, who's the founder of UBA. Franklin, you're the head of global finance for a bank that is, to a great degree, a Pan-African game changer, a bank that is despite risk, still soldiers on to expand, and is represented by an individual who is truly, he's not really a Nigerian, he's an African to a great degree. I mean, first and foremost, he's a Pan-African from what he does. Now, it's interesting to talk, we just heard from Afrexim Bank, which is a regional bank, development-oriented bank. But you are a commercial bank, the UBA, and you are the guys that are going to have to do the heavy lifting and link to global finance to make this happen. So it's always important, and I'm always cheered to see the representative of a commercial bank. We had the Bank of Rwanda, I think, on the last panel when we did this same panel at the AFCFTA Business Forum. So from your perspective, I would just like to give you free rein for a few minutes to tell me whatever is the most important thing for you with regards to intra-Africa trade finance, and what you and your peers like EcoBank and the rest of them should be doing, and also give us a fly-on-the-wall viewpoint of what are you saying amongst yourselves in terms of the banks about this and how you feel about the financing of this journey that we're going on and where you want to be standing.
Okay, thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. First of all, I'd like to say congratulate those that put this together, because I think it's most appropriate at this point in time, especially as we're looking at reducing poverty on the continent, because I see this as a major way to reduce poverty on the continent of Africa. Now, in talking about finance, I want to take it from perhaps three perspectives. First of all, what do banks do? Banks essentially involved in one key thing: payment services and financial intermediation. Of course, over and above that, you have, of course, the provision of advisory services. So let me start from payment services, because payment service is very key. The last speaker talked about having a payment platform that will ensure that trade flows are actually supported by some structure that ensures that payments are effected in a way that's efficient. Now, I'll just give an example, because at some point in my career, I used to be the CEO for Côte d'Ivoire, UBA in Côte d'Ivoire for about 5 years. Now, when you look at export, say, within UEMOA, it's a particularly simple thing because you're looking at ZOF. I take an example. If you're exporting from Côte d'Ivoire to Burkina, it's pretty simple because you're looking at the same currency. But when you're exporting from Côte d'Ivoire to Ghana, although they are contiguous, it's a different thing because in Ghana you got a CD, in Cote d'Ivoire you got a ZOF. So how do you handle this? So what we have done is to say, because we're present in a multiplicity of countries, we've been able to create reverse flows because we have a multiplicity of exporters from Cote d'Ivoire. You also have those importing into Cote d'Ivoire. So because of the multiplicity of presence that we do have across some of these geographies, those reverse flows have helped to ensure that issues about currency are addressed. Because the exporter from Cote d'Ivoire has taken facilities in ZOF, okay? And of course, he expects to get ZOF back in terms of the exports that he's making. The exporter from Ghana, yeah, is dealing in CD. For him, the facility is taken in CD in Ghana. What he wants is flows that will ensure that he can make these payments locally in cities. But what we'll try to do is to ensure that these reverse flows, like I talked about, enable us handle these transactions on an end-to-end basis. Now, there are also risks that are associated with this. When you're exporting, say, from a Cote d'Ivoire, for instance, yeah, because the ZOF is fixed, has a fixed parity to the euro, you're also taking a view on the euro. And the man at the CD that's in Ghana, yeah, most of his inputs will be largely in dollars, as it were. So he's taking a view on the dollar. So some of the things we're trying to handle in this case is to provide hedge solutions or hedging products that will ensure that the downside risks associated with those trades are also addressed. So payment is a key thing, and we need to work on this. Today, it's done in a simple way. Perhaps in the future, what we may be looking at will be some structure that will be maybe like an African unit of account.
Or like a continental payment system
absolutely.
Of some
and
sort.
You may have like an African unit of account where you set up the convergence criteria to ensure that all the currencies, looking at almost about 30-something currencies.
It's almost essential, though, isn't it? Isn't it essential to have a continental payment system with the AFCFTA? It's a no-brainer. It has to happen. I mean, how could you do it without it?
It must happen, because now it's done perhaps on a regional basis, based on convenience, based on, well, those are also present in multiplicity of geographies. But what we see going forward will be having like an African unit of account where, like I said earlier on, you have a convergence criteria that will ensure that people can understand what sort of payments they'll be getting. So let me move to the second side now in terms of intermediation, because intermediation that's a lot. It covers the waterfront, if you would. Now that's got to do with providing the financing. So the financing is at the firm level, the financing is at the individual level, the financing is also at the regional level, and of course the countries. Now, for the firms, what are we looking at? You're looking at essentially some sort of export financing. You're also looking at discounting export receivables. I think somebody had talked about the fact that banks is only collateral. Not necessarily. It depends on the structure of the transaction, because you can also discount export receivables to maybe 80%, 85 or 90% in such a way that it creates additional leverage for the entity to do more exports over time. So the pre-export, pre-shipment financing, and of course post-shipment financing, which is essentially more of the export discounting, that we have been doing, and that we have seen, gotten a lot of traction in terms of supporting most of the entities. But over and above that is the fact that you need to finance machinery, because you do not want a situation where most of these outfits that are just relying more on the primary sector in terms of just primary products, that shouldn't be. So we should be looking at more at local value added. Most of the geographies already have some of the plants. I know, for instance, Cote d'Ivoire, they're looking at enhancing local improvements to at least about 20% of local value added. This will create domestic employment in the first place. And over and above that, it also ensures that the kind of products that are going to be exported have some content, over and above just the raw materials that they've been known for. So financing of machinery is very key, and we will have a variety of structures. And because we're also a very global bank, we've been able to attract cheap financing to ensure that the investment returns are appropriate from the context of some of these outfits. Today, we're the only African bank operating out of the U.S. that's regulated by the OCC. So that ensures that the sort of funds that we're getting into the bank to provide financing, they're at the least cost possible in terms of supporting the real sector, of the economy. Now, the financing, because there's a major capital shortage, if you want to look at it, within the continent. So you also need foreign financing to complement that. And because of our presence, both in the UK and the US, we've been able to do this. And also, it's difficult for some outfits to bring financing into Africa for a couple of reasons. For some, perhaps use economics. Some of you use what they call the Lucas paradox. Yeah, the returns in Africa are supposed to be great, but what people look at is the risk-adjusted rate of return. And because we also understand the continent, we've been able to sell the continent to say, look, the returns are strong, provided that you have the structures that will enable you to take care of the downside risk. You can de-risk some of these investments, and of course, this will have a positive impact on your risk-adjusted rate of return. So we're selling that. So for us, we understand the continent, and we're able to ensure that we've been able to provide significant financing, to support the growth. So you talked about how this is being seen in the banking circle. I think it's a lot of excitement because it's going to be win-win for all. Win-win for the banks, win-win for the manufacturers, win-win for the exporters. So I believe it's the way to go, really. And the flow of funds will ensure that the financial inclusion becomes particularly very strong too, because the rural lady that's there, that's manufacturing, growing plants in a very small way and all that, can now be part of the trade across the continent, and this financial inclusion will, of course, reduce poverty, and of course, they can now start looking, because of the payments that will be getting, and banks can see those flows, it becomes easier for them to also provide financing to them, and of course, they can also look at providing insurance, covers, and supports and all that for all this. So we see it as a big thing, a big bang, if you would, for the continent in terms of financial services. Thank you.
Great. Thank you very much, Franklin. Now, that is one of the big banks there. But you touched on a lot of points. That old lady sitting in a village somewhere with aspirations to go beyond that village or beyond that town and be Pan-African can't do that really without technology. I mean, technology is going to play a very important role in the spread of intra-Africa trade and the development of the AFCFTA. I'm talking about mobile money. I'm talking about cryptocurrency. I'm talking about e-payment platforms. The list goes on and on. This is your bread and butter, Tunde. So could you give us a précis, a short version of how, from your perspective, being a player in the technology space, how that is going to add to how it's going to supercharge financing around intra-Africa trade?
No, I mean, the points you mentioned are spot on. I mean, the world is digitizing rapidly, right? Every single sector you can think of is digitizing. So it's coming, it's here now. And for us, when you think about the power of what we do, so I'll give two examples. So one is with Jumia, what we're doing with e-commerce. Essentially, you can say the traditional way is I have to go find a physical storefront, I have to kit it out, I have to have that capital, invest in a year, and hope that customers come. What e-commerce does essentially says, look, I can sit in my living room, have some items, put up some pictures, and start selling around the world overnight. The power of what we're doing now with fintech is to say, look, if I am a small business, I don't have any physical collateral to put up, I don't need to have land, we can remove bias in the process for getting financing, right? So it doesn't matter if you're a man, if you're a woman, if you're old, if you're young, as long as you show you have a track record of data that shows that, look, I can perform and make money from a business activity, you can get financing. And the power of this is because we're just using information and technology, we can do loans as little as 50,000 naira and make money on those facilities. And so for us, we see ourselves as a great complement to what a number of traditional lenders are doing, because it's tough for most commercial banks to say, look, they can do it, but to say, I will make money on a 50,000 naira loan. So what we're doing is you can come to us directly to apply for a facility, but we work with consumer goods companies, payment platforms, commercial banks to say, look, if we exchange data, we can get credit into your value chain, help them transact with you more. As they grow their businesses, we then also get a great subset of borrowers, and everybody can share in the economics, right? And that's part of technology. Essentially, what you're doing is 10xing the opportunity you have today.
Ali, I see you shaking your head because, of course, this is all very interesting from your perspective, from the Manufacturing Association of Nigeria, especially manufacturing, I guess, around the agricultural value chain. The technology is very important, yes?
Yes, technology is very, very important, mostly dealing with the backward integration in terms of getting our raw materials from the agricultural chain. You find out that more especially the small-scale farmers that we call peasant farmers that produce immediately during the harvesting season, they have to dump it up in the market where it brings down the price. But with technology and with the invention of commodity exchange coming up now, you see a lot of improvements in we getting the quality and clean materials from them, and they're getting better value through this technology because they can be paid easily through their bank accounts with a touch of knob.
Okay, I want to move on now and go and look at foreign direct investment, something that a few of you mentioned, Hippolyte and Franklin, amongst others, and Amin. And maybe I direct this question towards maybe Joy and Amin Marty from the IMF. In what way can FDI help to support the realization of all this? And also, Joy, what's the role of international organizations? How are you going to help us support intra-Africa trade and the realization of the AFCFTA? Maybe, Joy, you want to begin.
All right. Thank you very much, Mark. And it's been quite interesting to listen to all these private sector perspectives. I think the FDI question, to an extent, is pretty much the terrain I covered at the start, which is that the sort of investment that is going to support the CFTA to fruition is the investment that gets us to deal with the question of building productive capacity. And if you unpack that backwards, you're looking at what do we have in agriculture? And so what are the key products in which we're trading in intra-African trade? Your tobacco, your cereals, your manufacture, your tobacco, your cereals, your beverages, and so on and so forth. And so investment that comes in to scale that is how we shall get agro-processing going. Investment that goes into the textiles, that goes into the cars, that goes into petrochemicals, that goes into those sorts of things that are already existent is what will scale. Investment that allows for services to glue up agriculture and industry is what it will take to scale intra-African trade. And so how do you do that, which I think is your second question, and what is the role of international organizations?
Donor community, for example.
The donor community, I mean, they're representatives of the donor community, so perhaps they can take that. But I can tell you what international organizations will do and can do. And there somebody spoke about Rwanda, a very interesting story, how a country that perhaps wasn't a viable destination is one of the places where we're thinking about assembling cars. And I can tell you what UNCTAD has done in the context of Rwanda. There is no accident, there is no coincidence in countries reaching where they are in terms of investment attraction. It's a question of targeted policies. And so that is a process through which you have to understand what sort of laws, regulations, institutions will lead you to better project yourself, promote yourself as an investment attractor. And so the UNCTAD investment policy reviews were a critical document that Rwanda government used to shape what we now see as some of the successes coming out of the Rwanda Development Board. The I-Guide, the investment guide, some we've done for Nigeria now, which is basically the whole idea of trying to bring this one-stop shop concept to the information that investors need to understand an economy. And so what do you do with taxation? What do you do with land? What are the relevant government offices? Bringing it all together in one place. The investment guide is critical. But I think investors also need to understand what is the broad issue around the analytics and the trends. And so we produced the World Investment Report, which is all critical in terms of knowledge. There's also a question of skills, the sorts of skills that you will need to start businesses, to scale businesses, to build linkages. And there I'd like to interest you in the UNCTAD program, the EMPROTEC program, Enterprise Development Program, where we have gone through various African countries and helped to establish enterprise development centers, one in Uganda, one in Cameroon, one in Kenya, one in Rwanda, and the numbers are growing. The whole idea is to have the skill set that allows you to make the whole connection, where policy works with skills and works with enterprise.
Thank you very much, Joy. And we're talking about the role of international organizations in supporting intra-Africa trade. Amin, maybe just give us a minute.
On this, I mean, I can talk about what the International Monetary Fund is in terms of policy advice and then technical assistance, trying to get the right policies to bring some of these foreign direct investment, to try to increase revenue mobilization and others, and get the AFCFTA working while limiting losses. I mean, when you talked earlier about attracting FDI, I mean, I cannot just echo more what was just said in terms of having the right policy. If you have the right macroeconomic environment, if you have the right structural reforms, infrastructure, you're going to get the FDI coming in. And the FDI coming in is going to provide the long-term resource financing that's needed to try to address the challenges. You've seen earlier when I talked about revenue mobilization, you have some countries where the tax frontier was even below the limit. How do you go further than that? Well, you need to address issues on governance, inequality, increased income per capita, all of that as part of the reform environment that's needed. Now, the African Continental Free Trade Area is supposed to increase intra-trade. Some studies have shown that 130% within 5 years. Now, if you look at some other studies, it says that GDP growth was going to be increasing by 5 percentage points over 5 years. All of that is also positive to get the FDI coming in. So where do the international organizations come in? Trying to make sure that some of the policies are there to facilitate that. And let's not forget that when you are moving to free trade area, you're also going to have winners and losers, right? In terms of some industries will be winning, others may be less in different countries that you'd also need to train and you need to accommodate. Thanks.
Okay, now, Africa has an agenda. It's called the Agenda 2063, run by the African Union. It aspires to an African world-class infrastructure. Someone else, I think Hippolyte mentioned investment in infrastructure, which Afrexim Bank is very much into. We need massive amount of infrastructure by 2045 that should enable intra-Africa trade to go from that maybe 14%, I think, or 15% that it's out, to grow exponentially. Now, Africa's total contribution to global trade is about, what, 2.5%? I mean, what is it? It's roughly floating very, very low. 2.8% of the global trade is Africa. That's Africa's share. Yeah? We need to push that up, 12%, 15%, 20%. Now, all the evidence suggests that to close that large financing gap and to realize the ambitions that we've been talking about, it's not really the existence of capital that's necessarily an issue, but rather the lack of mechanisms that are needed to make it available, and also the policies around that. Now, Agenda 2063 is being pushed. The people with their hands on the steering wheel is the African Union, so it would be remiss of me not to step off the stage. Yes, I'm going to do it. And I'm going to walk over to Mr. Albert Muchanga, who has the responsibility as the Commissioner for Trade, His Excellency Albert Muchanga, Ambassador, to really speak about this. I could see that you enjoyed this, didn't you? This was interesting. If you could just stand up, please, so people can see you. I just want you to have an intervention here, because there is this vision of a supercharged economy with roads, rails, bridges, and everything it takes to make that a reality. The Africa we want, I think you call it. The Africa we want. How do we get there?
Well, what we are doing is part of the process. The Agenda 2063 goes up to the year 2063. And a lot of people say all of us will be dead by then. But we have broken it into 10-year implementation plans. So we are now in the first 10-year implementation plan. And each one of them has key deliverables. And we already have delivered on a number of them. One of them is the African Economic Platform, which was done last year. And then we launched the single African air transport market in January this year. And we also delivered the protocol on free movement of people. And now the African Continental Free Trade Area. And within the African Continental Free Trade Area, we have what we call trade-related infrastructure, because we need to move goods and services efficiently across the continent. However, we're comforted by the fact that even with the existing infrastructure, we can still grow the trade numbers to increase intra-African trade. But as already indicated, when we do actual investments, green investments in infrastructure, there's a critical shortage close to $91 billion US dollars a year. And we need to close that gap. But there's also one figure that we need to bring in on the financing gap. And this is for the small, or the micro, small, and medium enterprises. I was reading Africa Business for this month, and they've indicated that each year there's a financing gap. There's a financing gap of close to $331 billion US dollars per year in terms of the needs of the small and medium enterprises. So we need to come up with innovative mechanisms to really meet that financing gap. Why? Because at the end of the day, if we have to drive employment levels, if we have really to bring in new businesses, we need to have a very vibrant micro, small, and medium enterprises network across Africa. That's my contribution for now. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Ambassador Albert Muchanga. Now I'm going to, I just want to go to Hippolyte first. Now, Hippolyte, I'm going to ask you to Crystal Borges respond to that, but also answer this question. You've got wealth funds, insurance, pension funds. Someone mentioned pension funds, central banks, diaspora bonds, green bonds, you name it, lots of bonds, yes. But away from those traditional sources, which domestic and regional instruments are likely to gain popularity? Crystal Borges, into this future, and tell us what we're going to see in the next decade, say, in Africa around this.
Before we get into the future, I think I'd like to mention the fact that in order to support the vision put forward by the African Union, the CFTA, the bank on the Plan 5 put together $25 billion by 2021 cumulatively to finance intra-African trade. So that is being disbursed as we speak to support the flows of goods across the continent. I think the point made by the Commissioner is extremely important in the need to boost and improve African infrastructure space and support SMEs. And I wanted to actually highlight the challenge we are facing and call for the need for us to do a better job at mobilizing domestic financing resources. When you look at the FDI mentioned by our colleague from UNTAC, the last report they published, FDI into Africa decreased by 21% to about $41 billion. Essentially today, the whole of Africa received less FDI than Singapore, which was $67 billion. So we have to, Singapore, the tiny Singapore, receive more FDI than the whole of Africa put together. So we'll have a lot of work to do to boosting those FDI numbers and shifting their directions toward the manufacturing and industrialization that she kindly mentioned, because now they are still directed toward the commodity and natural resources. But I think what the bank has done, this shortage of financing is not due to lack of resources. As we speak, we have almost close to $500 billion outside in terms of foreign reserve. And what the bank has done in our central bank deposit program, CENDEPT, has been to encourage African Central Bank to bring part of those resources. We're going to give them a higher return on those placements than what they could possibly get under the zero lower bound interest rate environment around the world. And thanks to leading nations, number of leading nations like Nigeria, Egypt, and so forth, our central bank deposit program has enabled us to finance and support trade Why? Reducing the cost of fund, because it's much cheaper than what we get by going to the capital market. So we'll have to encourage more Africans, leaders and officials, to take the steps and bring more of those resources to support and finance African trade and investment. It's very important to address the critical issue that the Commissioner mentions. It will also help close the gap in the financing of SMEs and so forth. I think we are also exploring the options of tapping into pension fund. We have large pool. We are talking to the Nigerian Pension Fund, the SSS exact. We're talking to pension fund in Southern Africa and East Africa in particular. I think Kenya has a very large pool. We are trying to also explore the options of mobilizing those resources toward the financing of productive investment within the continent at a return which is much higher than what they get through foreign placements. So those are some of the specific initiatives that the bank is undertaking to address the current challenges, but also anticipate the future, as you mentioned in your questions.
Thank you, Hippolyte Fofak, Chief Economist of Afrexim Bank. Before I went to you, I could see that Sheni Adio from the Nigerian Bar Association section of Business Law wanted to come in. Apologies, you have the floor, sir.
Yes, thank you very much. I just wanted to expand on some of the comments that His Excellency Ambassador Muchanga made, and also my friend Tunde Kehinde. Many of you may be aware that, at least speaking locally, from a local perspective, one area that we also need to discuss and perhaps focus on is the ease of doing business. Nigeria has made significant strides in that regard. So in 2017, for example, I think we went from, we were ranked 169 out of 109 countries. We moved up significantly. Last year, we moved up another 20 points. And some of the things that the government has been doing include trying to ease doing business. One of such things include, recently we developed a collateral registry, which is housed with the CBN. So for small, medium enterprises, for example, they can access credit with respect to their inventory, for example. They don't need to have land or property to access inventory. All they need to do is, to access credit, all they need to do is use their inventory registered with the collateral registry, and then either the central bank or commercial banks can provide facilities to them. Also, part of what the government has been doing in terms of law reform is to look at our laws, particularly, for example, a very critical legislation, which is our Companies and Allied Matters Act. Currently is being reviewed at the National Assembly towards repealing and reenacting it to make it more SME friendly, so that things that are archaic, such as requiring small businesses to file annual returns on a yearly basis that requires financial statements and the like, will be removed. Also, going forward, you'll be able to incorporate a company, a limited liability company with a single shareholder and a single director, and just basically remove all kinds of bottlenecks to make it doing business in Nigeria more friendly. Also, the CAC, the Companies Corporate Affairs Commission, there's been a lot of automation that's been done so that in terms of trying to incorporate businesses now can be done without any human intervention. So a lot of things are being done in terms of trying to ease doing business, but I think it's an integral part of what we're discussing this morning.
I think Nigeria's at 146, I think, at the moment,
now,
right?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. Now, we've got a few minutes to take some questions. Don't be shy. Yeah, we are not shy. Look at that. Who do I choose now? Let me see. Okay, this gentleman, because you're better dressed than the rest of us, so please stand up. Please make your question shorter than the answer.
Thank you very much. Engineer Awal Ibrahim from the Nigerian Association of Small and Medium Enterprises. I'm directing my question to Afrexim Bank. We were part of the National Quality Infrastructure for Nigeria. We have been trained by UNIDO. It's a EU-funded program and implemented by UNIDO. We have gone so far we are now on the process of establishing our own conformity assessment centers. So we are looking towards how we are going to partner with the Afrexim Bank and actualize this. That's one. Secondly, with the support of the Nigerian Office of Trade Negotiation, we have carried out preliminary assessment of informal cross-border trading. In fact, the NOTN supported us to start with the most critical area, which is the Maiduguri Trade Corridor. We have now collected the data. We have commissioned a consultant to give a report. Through the NOTN, we are going to partner to conduct a lot of other programs. Finally, the Nigerian Investment Promotion Commission, UNIDO, and SIMIDAN have agreed with our concept, which we are developing a linkage between small and medium enterprises and major businesses, which we want to put AFREXIM into that. It's a business linkage program. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Ibrahim from the informal sector group there. Over here, I'll ask this because I'm lazy. I'm going to just ask you rather than have to go over there. So stand up and just introduce yourself and just ask a quick question.
Thank you. My name is Ayadeji from IFEX. So the question is about food security across and the food trade. So if you look at West Africa, East Africa, at a regional level, food balances, but there's excesses and deficits within each country, but there's no common markets to make it even visible, and the data isn't available. And what can we do to inform governments that if we all open our borders, at least within the regions, every country at every month of the year would have food and wouldn't have to import?
Okay, so listen, you heard that question, right? It's about food security. How do we convince governments that if you open your borders, that we will never really be hungry because it releases food, basically, effectively. So, and then I'll take one more question, and then you fight over the answers, okay? Don't hold back. I want you all to answer this, sir.
Thank you very much. I agree with all they've said. My name is Olawale Ogunkola from University of Ibadan. Yes. The argument is this. It's a blunt question, which I will try to explain. How much is the cost of AFCFTA in implementation? We don't have that figure. And we need the figure in order to talk about the financing. And when you are doing that, I'm talking more about adjustment cost. It cannot be done globally. It cannot be done by AU. Individual countries, sectors, we have to do the computation. You will need to think about capacity building. For example, some people will lose their job. They have new job, but they don't have the skill. You need to train them. Firms will have to close down because they are no longer viable. New firms will require new investment. Government will lose revenues. They will need to develop another tax base. So all these costs, I think we need to.
Okay, if you bear with me, I know you were asked the first question, Hippolyte, but I'm going to reverse this, and I'm not going to ask anybody on the panel. They're thinking, oh my God, is that question directed at me? How do I answer that? Don't worry. This gentleman is going to answer it instead. Please stand up. It's
Professor, let me face you. A number of times, when a lot of people worry if we are doing the right thing to go into the African continental free trade area, I always challenge them. I said, go back to history. When our forefathers and our foremothers were fighting for independence, did they sit back to say, can we really do it? And if they had said, no, we cannot do it, we would still be under colonial rule. So we have to take the step to say, this is our destiny. We need to do something different. Our forefathers and the foremothers gave us independence. What legacy do we leave as this generation? That's the question we need to do it. And life is always full of challenges. There are no answers on everything. You have to really say, on the basis of what is available, what can we do? And there was a realization right from the beginning that Africa remaining a conglomeration of small and fragmented states has no future. What we need is a large market space. And this was created by coming up with the African Continental Free Trade Area. We really exploit large economies of scale, and we reduce the cost of business. And in order to prepare ourselves for that, a lot of preparatory studies are being done. One of them is to come up with what we call the adjustment facility. The study is underway. It's going to come out before the end of the year. But as we prepare for that study, we are already in discussion with the AFCFTA Bank to say, can you avail us a line of credit to support this? And they said, in principle, we are. We are also working with other parties to see if they can come up with infrastructure development project support to compensate for the loss of revenues. All these are being taken into account. But more fundamentally, when we have established the Secretariat of the African Continental Free Trade Area, we are going to come up with a work program which is going to focus on 2 issues. What we need to do to realize our results, and what will be the cost if Africa decides to remain where it is. And that will be a future of poverty. So we want to move towards a future of prosperity. Let us be very, very, very confident that we can do it if we want to do it. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Okay, Hippolyte, 1 minute, please.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. I think I would like to go back quickly to the point raised and the conformity assessment. And you're raising a fundamental issue. One of the supply side constraints that we identify is in the area of testing and certification center, which has been a constraint to Africa exporting to the world and will also be to the continent. And in this continent today, South Africa and Egypt are about the only country with those infrastructure, which are key for intra-African trade and global trade. The bank is investing heavily in building, testing, and certification center. We actually have planned to do so in this country as we speak. It's ongoing. So let's talk later on as to what we can do. On cross-border informal trade, you also have your finger on the critical issues, and all the key players are here. We are working with the United Nations, UNECA, on a cross-border investment, and cross-border informal trade surveys, looking at a couple of corridors. We had a meeting last month in Cairo with the West African Monetary Union, which will serve as a pilot. So we'll be happy to bring you on board as part of that initiative, which involves actually developing a robust analytical framework for estimating informal cross-border trade. On the issue of transition from SME to medium and global corporations, that is a part. We need more of that to really establish robust economic growth. And you'll be pleased to know that the bank on the President Rama is actually expanding its trade finance intermediary and correspondent banking to provide more resources to our intermediary to support SMEs and medium-sized enterprise across the continent. Thank you.
Thank you. And finally, very quickly, within 30 seconds, Joy, can you answer this question about food security from the young gentleman over there?
Yes, thank you very much. I think the food security question has its response in the nature of tariff policy in intra-African trade, that you find intra-African trade in food, in agriculture, the rates are, well, it's about 15% only. And there's a reason for that in tariff, that the tariffs are high, averaging around 22%. And the CFTA is part of that response, because if you try to bring the barriers down, aiming ultimately for zero, then you open the markets for food. There is a catch there, though, which is to ensure that the excluded products and the sensitive products in the CFTA lists do not include that food which is needed to go across the continent. And the final point I'd like to make is that even when we bring the tariffs down, we need to focus on production of food, because ultimately the CFTA will offer opportunities for those with food to produce in this case. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Joy. It was a joy. I'm going to stop. That's the last one I'm going to do ever. So can you bring up the agenda again, please? Bring up the agenda. Let's see it. Remember I showed you the agenda of what's going to happen? Bring up the agenda on the screen, please. Thank you. It's changed a bit. I think the rooms have switched around. So in the breakout sessions, preparing tariff and service offers is in the Neptune. Breakout session 2, national implementation strategies, is in Jupiter. And the second phase negotiations in Saturn and Uranus. And you've got some great moderators, people like David Luke from UNECA, and I think Chiedu Osakwe might be moderating one as well. So do join them in those rooms. We're going to take a 30-minute break. But before we do, please, as we say in Lagos, Edide, which means stand up. Please stand up. you stand up and you give them a round of applause, please. An excellent first panel to kick us off. Thank you very much. Oh, take a picture. Thank you very much. I'll see you at the coffee and the tea.
Oh yeah, I've got a cold. Thank you very much. Thank you.
One, two, one, one.